Well, hello again, sports fans. This is a recent flight of my Ranger. Today I'm being ably assisted by Nick, who's visiting us from New Zealand.
Yeah, not that hill, no. When you're and quite a firm throw, yeah? Yeah. Okay.
As it turns out, he's quite an accomplished tosser. Nick's brought along an old FPV enabled FS61 that he used to fly in the UK. The plan for the day was to get airborne at the same time and hopefully get some aerial footage of our respective planes. Unfortunately, the FS61 was having some technical difficulties and it hit the ground fairly hard when Nick was trying to trim it out, and it lost a wing. We're here fairly late in the day and the wind has come up quite strong. I've just decided to throw the Ranger up and see how it handles the conditions before coming up with a flight plan. So I take it up to about 50 or 60 metres and slip it into loiter mode, and Nick and I sit back and watch how she handles it. I do a few circuits, but she doesn't seem to be handling it as well as it normally does, and I'm not sure whether it's the wind or the flight controller that's causing the problem. She seems to be doing a short left-hand bank at the northern end of what should be a right-hand circle. So I'm not comfortable with sending her off on a long-range mission and decide I'll have a go at flying up to the top of Mount Tennant. So I switch into pilot assist mode and start applying some elevator to see if I can get her up to around about 400 metres before heading off in the general direction of the mountain. So at this point I'm circling it around about 100 metres and I start applying some up elevator to increase the altitude fairly gradually. From the Mobius footage it looks like the gimbal started misbehaving around about this point. It doesn't look like it's able to maintain its horizontal attitude as the plane banks and just seems to be slipping around with gravity. So the Ranger gets up to about 250 metres fairly easily, but then just seems to hit a ceiling and doesn't seem to be much I can do to get it to go past. She's on maximum throttle, which does seem a little bit low, and I end up taking it out of PA mode to see if the throttle will increase just in manual mode, but not a great deal. This section shows the problem with the gimbal. It's definitely drooping, though the insert shows the plane's flying fairly straight and level. It turned out to be a power supply problem rather than the gimbal controller though, so it wasn't too hard to fix. That certainly wasn't the case with the climb rate though. I tried everything. I was turning into the wind and diving to pick up some more speed and then trying to climb again, but it seemed to be pretty well stuck in that ceiling. So I ended up putting it back into pilot assist mode while I had to think about it. Nick suggested that I add some manual elevator trim into the transmitter to see if that helps. But it's something that I'm generally reluctant to do given the way the Tornado flight controller works. When I'm flying in pilot assist mode, there are a couple of little lock symbols that appear on the OSD when you release the sticks to indicate that the Tornado has control of the heading and altitude. These symbols disappear when you override the flight controller and take manual control of the sticks. And when you let go of the sticks they come back again, which is, as I was demonstrating to Nick here, the same thing happens when you enter trims on one of the controls as I have here on the elevator trim. The tornado is now no longer managing the altitude and won't until that additional trim has been removed. In this particular instance, it took me quite a while to figure out exactly how much trim had gone in and remove it. Of course, while I was trying to remove the trims, I was focused entirely on that one little spot on the OSD and wasn't really paying attention to where the plane was actually going. When the lock symbol does eventually reappear and I start focusing on where the plane is, I don't immediately recognise the location and start trying to have a little bit of a look around. But almost immediately I start getting video dropouts and need to play with the video receiver. I'm not sure why the gimbal decided to tilt over at this point in time, but the plane isn't in a bank, it's still heading straight and level under PA mode. At this point I think I'm actually flying north of the field and I'm rotating the antennas in that direction and not having much luck, and the reason is because I'm well south of the field. I'm not having much luck improving the video reception, so I decide to switch the Ranger in to return to home mode while I try and figure it out. As the Mobius footage shows, the plane does actually turn for home, but the picture doesn't show any real improvement at all. I'm not overly concerned about the Ranger because I am getting the occasional flash which suggests that it's still in the air and flying towards home. I am, however, starting to get quite frustrated with why scanning the area of the sky where I think I am isn't improving the picture that I'm getting on the monitor. I eventually realised that the video signal is at its strongest when I'm pointing vaguely in a southern direction and the penny finally starts to drop. I figure out that I must be south of the field and that the video signal is being blocked by the steel containers that make up our club site, so I walk the Overlord array out to a point where they'll be clear of the containers. It works, and by the time I get my eyes back on the screen and focused, I realise that I'm heading straight for a ridge and have to apply some elevator and full throttle to avoid a crash. It doesn't look like I missed by very much, so very fortuitous timing on getting the picture back. I can see that I'm in return to home mode, and for some reason I've lost half the altitude I had, so that's my main priority. I'm just holding the elevator on full and the throttle on full, trying to get that back. So the Ranger gradually claws its way back up to 150 metres, and I let go of the sticks and just monitor how the tornado's managing the return to home. It seems to be maintaining that 150 metres altitude, but it is weaving from side to side fairly dramatically, which is not normal behaviour. She does seem to be heading in the general direction of home, but I've seen this sort of behaviour before when the GPS was misbehaving, and I'm wondering if that's the case here. The OSD is showing 5 bars of satellite reception, which is the maximum, so maybe it's something else. Round about now I start noticing that the battery voltage is way down, even though the consumption shows that I should still have plenty left. So I decide to see if I can take a more direct route home by using the home arrow on the middle of the screen. I'm not sure if the arrow direction is any more consistent than the RT home direction that the Ranger seems to be taking, but I still don't know exactly where I am in the landscape, and at least it gives me something to do until I do recognise where I am. So eventually Nick and I managed to recognise the road and their field, and I can let go of the sticks and let the heart rate slow down a bit while the Ranger wings itself home for the rest of the way, weaving backwards and forwards as she comes. Given the battery situation, I decide I need to get it down on the ground as quick as possible and slip it back into manual mode, and initially decide to try and land it by eye. In my eagerness to get down, I ended up flying too low down behind one of the trees near the end of the strip and lose sight of the plane, and have to switch back to the monitor to finish off the landing. It wasn't very pretty, but at least she came down in one piece, and I'll be happy to accept that any day of the week. So the only thing I can think of that might have contributed to this was that I had forgotten to press the initialisation button on the Tornado before I started. Of course, that doesn't account for why the gimbal went on the blink, but check this out. It decides to reinitialise just in time to capture Nick and I wandering out to the strip to pick up the old Ranger. And there's the arming tone indicating that all is well. Who says electronics don't have a sense of humour?